the Minister speaks a lot about hedging and the market, and we've all had the briefings from the electricity companies, the providers like Electric Ireland, for instance, where when you speak of the issue of hedging, and they say, and I quote from a document that we received, that they are buying electricity in advance, which is hedging, and that, by their words, that saved Electric Ireland residential electricity customers €650 over the last 2 years. We can't have this debate without having a fundamental critique of the electricity market and the energy market across the European Union. If we are relying on a market that hedges its prices or buys forward and so on, the shocks that have come into the system because of what's happening in Ukraine and the anticipated future shocks given the geopolitical situation that's there at the moment suggest to me that what is in place by way of a hedging market is not going to provide the stability that households need to be able to pay down or pay for their energy costs into the future. I'm trying to be fair in my analysis. I don't think that's an unfair analysis. What I worry deeply about is the fact that when a Green Minister, and I don't mean, and this is not personalised in any way, when a Green Minister talks about energy independence and talks about accepting the fact that there is a market that is hedging by its very nature, I worry when a Green Minister doesn't fundamentally critique the nature of that market. And why isn't it that we as a country are not pushing back against that very issue that places so much uncertainty on households, not only in Ireland or on this island, but right across the European Union. And that is something that is going to have to be fundamentally critiqued because it can't sustain itself. When I hear the Minister suggesting that somebody can go to the St. Vincent de Paul or can rely on the Department of Social Protection or other such means, either charity or via the Department of Social Protection under the Supplementary Welfare Allowance Scheme for an additional payment. Well, let me tell the Minister that in 2022, the sum total that was spent supporting people to meet the costs of their bills when they presented their case or their application form for a supplementary welfare allowance to a community welfare officer was €1.8 million. €1.8 million was spent by the Department of Social Protection through the community welfare officers, through the supplementary welfare allowance scheme in supporting people. In other words, the massive advertising campaign that was undertaken through gov.ie is clearly not working. And any attempt by the government to say that somebody can go to the Department of Social Protection for those supports, well, the evidence is in the meagre amounts of money that have been spent last year. You probably spent less paying out than what you spent on your advertising campaign on this so-called additional needs payment that was trumpeted. And I think that's something that is going to have to be looked at if you're going to provide real and meaningful supports for households if they're going to meet the costs of their energy supply. Because it's clear to me, and I know this from my own constituency office, that working families do not know that they can access such payments. Now, the Minister will state that that's a matter for the Minister for Social Protection, but if the Minister himself comes into this House and says that people can access the Supplementary Welfare Allowance Scheme, let me tell the Minister respectfully that not enough people know of the scheme and not enough people are availing of the scheme, and therefore that is a systems failure, that's a failure of government. Because it could meaningfully help people if it was presented to people and marketed to people in the right way. Now, bear that 1.8 million figure in mind as one of the supports that the Minister talks about. 1.8 million. Centrica plc, the British company that owns Bord Gáis Energy in Ireland, said it expects its adjusted earnings for its financial year in the 12 months to the end of June 2023 to triple to almost 1.8 billion. So I've got my meagre 1.8 million, and Centrica is earning 1.8 billion. Vermilion. Record European gas prices during the summer ensured that revenues recorded by Vermilion Energy from the Corrib gas field for the first 9 months of 2022 have more than doubled to 189.9 million. Corrib gas revenues in dollars for the first 9 months of 2022 were 2.63 billion, up from 1.3 for the same period in 2021. Let me speak briefly about ESB. And as I say, we've had the briefings from ESB in relation to this concept of hedging, but hedging does nothing for the household that is struggling to pay their bills at the moment. Profits at the ESB soared in the 6 months to the end of June 2022 amid surging energy prices, earnings including a one-off gain from what it called quote-unquote exceptional volatility in global commodity markets jumped from 390.3 million from 128.4 million in 2021. Now, if you accept the fact that Electric Ireland decided in 2022 to forgo profits in its residential business by giving the €50 credit to each of its 1.1 million residential customers, you'd have to say that that was arguably a very small gesture on the part of the provider in that instance, and I'm not sure how meaningful it was. And I would say, if you look at the bills that we've all seen throughout this House, it was a meaningless. It could be more meaningful, and I would hope that ESB would look at that. And we know that the issue in relation to the fact that it is giving its business customers an increase at a time where it says it can't throw profits from one entity into another, it does beg the question as to why the same savings could not be passed on to residential customers. And that's another question that has to be answered as well. The bottom line for us in supporting this motion is that while there is an acknowledgement of what the government has done in relation to things like the fuel allowance and expanding that, which every opposition party called for, there is more that could be done in relation to the supplementary welfare allowance scheme to ensure that more and more working families could have access to those supports that are housed within the Department of Social Protection. But that has to be done on the basis that there is maybe perhaps a change of the criteria there to ensure that more and more working families in particular can come into that scheme, and then that you ensure that people know about it. Because very often, and I spend a lot of my time, I'm an old school politician, I fill the medical card application forms, I'll fill the disability allowance forms, I'll fill the supplementary welfare allowance forms. I'm old school in that sense, but it keeps me honest and keeps me close to the people. And I'm not sure I could say the same about this government, because I'm not sure that very many of them of late have had that connection with real people in relation to how they're struggling in their everyday lives. But I do think that if the Minister present could speak to his counterpart to ensure that more funding flowed into the supplementary welfare allowance scheme so that it was made available particularly to working families who are on fixed incomes, then I think that would be a meaningful gesture. And on energy independence, I still cannot understand why this government is not taking more of a risk and being more adventurous about ensuring that there are more marine area consents, for instance, issued, so that people can start mapping our southwest coast and not only relying on what is going to happen on fixed platforms for wind on the east coast, that there should be more risk being taken by government to ensure that we can set up the platforms to deliver the wind, to bring the energy ashore, so that we can create energy independence. I worry about the conservative and cautious and risk-averse nature of this government in respect of the possibility and the potential for wind, offshore wind on floating platforms to bring it ashore. Be more adventurous and take those risks and let it happen.
Thank you.